one of the things we know about neurodivergent people is that they have far more neurons in their parietal lobe. Their brains
Okay.
are hardwired to feel more things. And sometimes feeling more things means you experience like the most intense version of that. And sometimes you actually have so much connection you don't feel it at all. And so a lot of neurodivergent people, whether they are autistic, ADHD, gifted, dyslexic, OCD, dyspraxic, there's, those are many of the terms of art there. They may feel things way more than somebody else would.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open.
I mean, it's a real love fest already, man. We're doing great.
I know. I wish we could hug or something.
Long distance high five.
There we go. Boom. Done. So I want to start off by asking you, you're doing a lot of great work. You're speaking publicly. You're an author. You have a podcast that you just started somewhat recently, right? So you're doing a lot of work in the neurodivergent world, but I'm guessing when you were a little kid, you didn't really have this on your bingo card. So I'm curious, what did you want to be when you were a little kid? How did that change throughout the years and lead you to the work you're doing today?
Okay. So when I was little, what I really wanted to be was I wanted to be a marine biologist by day, and I wanted to be Batman by night.
Makes perfect sense.
It's right. No one would ever expect Batman to be a marine biologist, right? And then you have excuses to go places. Very logical, right? I was ahead of the game. But the thing that always drew me to Batman is that he could outsmart the bad guys, right? Like I was a very chubby, awkward kid. And so I was never going to be Superman, right? I was never going to be the Hulk, right? But Batman was just a dude. And like, he's like, I can outthink the Joker, right? And that was very appealing to young, very smart me who didn't understand what that smartness was all about. And I've always been drawn to the smart, nerdy, awkward characters. My favorite Ninja Turtle was Donatello, right?
Mine too.
I actually, as a psychologist, I actually think that's the best personality test out there. I was like, who is your favorite Ninja Turtle? And when people tell me, I'm like, it absolutely tracks, like 95% of the time.
You know what, though? I did find myself like relating to Raphael a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That one. Donatello was my favorite, and I liked his weapon. I forget what they call it, but the stick.
Yeah.
And then Raphael, I was like, I kind of relate to him a little bit. Stubborn. Yeah.
Yep. Fiery, I'm not going to just listen for the sake of listening. Like, you got to get me to follow you if I'm going to follow you. I respect
exactly.
it.
Exactly. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but
I feel like that's going to happen a lot in the best possible way. And then, really my life became about, the older I got, the more I realized I didn't fit in, and that I needed to participate in spaces that were not just what everybody was doing. I played youth sports, and I was, okay at basketball and okay at baseball and okay at hockey. I was pretty good at soccer. It wasn't until high school where my buddy convinced me to do musical theater that I was like, oh, these are my people, right?
wow.
This very dramatic, outspoken, burst into song group, that those are, so I lived in both worlds, right? I was a varsity soccer player in the fall and a musical theater kid the rest of the year. And, but thinking about how different it felt backstage in theater productions versus in the locker room, where everybody was talking about like professional wrestling and Biggie Smalls and things that I just wasn't vibing on. And I would be like, yeah, bro, totally, bro, things and stuff. Yeah. Right.
Ironically, I'm going to WWE this weekend with my buddies.
And people are like, so you hate WWE? I was like, no. Like, I actually appreciate it a lot more as an adult than I did as like a 13, 14-year-old kid. I was like, because, it's like I was like, this is fake, right? It's like, this is fake. But have you seen the thing that's been floating around the internet? Like, WWE is drag brunch for straight people.
Yes.
And I was like, that's
That's
exactly,
it.
very
Yes.
theatrical, right?
That's what I liked about it. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a professional wrestler,
Yeah.
but it was as I got older. Yeah, exactly. As I got older, it was more so about the storytelling elements of it and the way that it like, I saw this one that was it was like 2 days ago. I saw this meme that was like, only grown men will understand what it's like to watch a scripted show and cheer on someone finishing their story,
Right.
which was like a huge thing last year. And it was just like, that's so true. But it's like, how is it different than soap opera or anything?
Right.
It's all scripted entertainment. And this one just happens to have a little bit of athletic combat.
Yeah. Well, and I did stand up for a while. I was a trained improv actor. The best guy I ever did scenes with an improv was a former professional wrestler. This guy
Oh, wow.
thought on his feet so well, and his physicality was just incredible. I mean, I blew him a kiss once in a scene, and he did like a Dick Van Dyke style pratfall over a thing, pop up, and I'm like, I just was in awe of
Oh, wow.
doing a scene with him. And it was just like, you are so much better than I will ever be. Like in improv, you lift each other up, right? So it was like,
Yep.
I was lifted by his brilliance.
That makes sense too, because they've got to think on their feet when they're out there talking, right? And even performing, you got to think on your feet.
If you miss a jump or you miss a kick, like, can you sell that? Like, that's so much a part of the role you're playing.
Yeah. And with no time to think or process it.
Right?
You're just on. Yeah. I actually did. Yeah. I did like one day of wrestling school when I was 16 or 17. And I got to tell you, like, you learn like a 3-move set and just processing that. And also they beat the shit out of me. And I told my dad was like, you have to try it, because I wanted to do it so bad. And I was like, I don't want to do this. This is too hard, too physical. But like to just think on your feet, to do like 3 things in a row, which was like hit the ropes, get duck a clothesline, get body slammed. That was all they taught us that first day. And even that was like, so to think on your feet is very, very probably underrated skill set of those guys. And then of course that translates to improv too.
Absolutely. Well, and that's why like so much of the social skills work I do with neurodivergent people is based in improv, because it's so easy to want to script out everything you're going to say, right? Like, I did not think we would be talking about professional wrestling.
Neither did I.
We're just rolling with it. And so I tell my kids, like, you're going to go and you're going to ask somebody to hang out, and something crazy will happen. A fire alarm will go off. Somebody will fall down. Your mom will yell at you from across the parking lot because she's there 20 minutes early. And if you shut down because like, well, this isn't going how I rehearsed it in my brain, then you're just going to stand there like a screensaver. And the other kid you're talking to is going to be like, I'm going to go. Like,
that's true.
You don't have to be able to, it's not so much doing it perfectly, but it's doing something, because if you can keep it going, you can find your rhythm again. So teaching people to be reactive, to be in the moment, is foundational to any social skill, and I was doing a workshop with some kids, a couple, this was like a month and a half ago. And I was like, all right, so we're doing, the improv game Freeze. I was like, all right, in this scene, after I yell freeze, you're going to come in and you guys are on the world's worst date. And then this person's going to come in as the sexy waiter and he's going to distract. And it's funny, I just sort of gestured to the kid. I was like, you. But what ends up happening in the scene is like, I'm not interested in you. I'm interested in her. And all 3 of them shifted so beautifully into this moment where it's like, all of a sudden he's like, well, I'm on a date with her and you can't have her. And they did this whole like broing out alpha male thing. And the girl was in tears. She was laughing so hard.
Oh my God.
And I posted the scene. I was like, guys, like, that's amazing. And just bring that energy the next time you're at a frat party, the next time you're at a family reunion, next time you're on the bus, right?
Yeah.
And, they were like, this really made sense to me. This really helped me understand that it's not having a plan, it's having a set of skills, because you can apply your skills anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? As someone who tries to plan as much as I can and nothing ever goes the way it's planned, I think that's probably a good skill set for everyone to learn. Like, things aren't going to go as planned. They're not going to be easy. Yeah. No matter how well you plan out a trip, no matter how well you plan out your day, it's going to get some sort of torpedo coming into it at some point. So how did you, so you said, I'm sorry, and I totally sidebarred us, but you were saying in high school, I think you were doing sports, you found theater, which by the way, I found theater in high school too. I didn't like musicals,
Yeah.
but I did like theater. And how did you realize, you said you were feeling different. How did you realize that you wanted to get into the work of psychology?
So I grew up in psychology. Both of my parents are clinical psychologists.
Okay.
So, and I always joke that I never got grounded as a kid, but my parents did make me talk about why I did what I did. Like, miss curfew. Well, son, what
That's
were you thinking?
worse.
Like, just ground me, damn it! Like, send me to my room. Like, no, we need to think about what's driving your motive. I was like, oh, I hate this so much. But I realized that most families didn't talk about feelings. Most families didn't have productive conversations, and I know how much I benefited from that. And honestly, as a socially anxious kid, being everybody's therapist in high school is a great way to make sure people like you. I was like, yes, I
Mm,
will listen to your boy troubles for several hours because this means we're friends, right?
yeah.
This is good friend thing. And so it's a little bit of a nature nurture thing. Like, two psychologists are probably going to have a kid who's very empathetic, right? Strong communicator. But it really wasn't until so after college, I got a job in Boston. I was working in a travel company, and
What'd you go to college for initially?
so I went to Wake Forest University, North Carolina. I double majored in psychology and communications.
Okay. Oh my
Um,
gosh.
oh,
That's a great combo.
great combo. So many words. There were so
I,
many, so many words. Uh, and you know, I had always worked with kids, like, even through college. Like, I volunteered at the community center. I did an internship at like the Head Start daycare, but Wake was very much a research psychology school. So
mm,
they were like, oh, like, you got this amazing internship after college. It was at Harvard. I worked in their biopsychophysiology lab. It was incredible, but it was also 60-hour weeks for no money, coding in
mm,
data about brainwaves, and I just burned out. So I
I
was like,
can
let me
imagine.
switch. I'm going to work in travel for a while. I'm going to make a little bit of money. And then a couple years in, our company sponsored a little league team, and one of the kids on the team, God bless him, he wanted to play third base, and he was the most ADHD kid I've ever met in my life. And I was like, dude, if you play third base, you'll die. Right? you know, he's like, I'm going to play at Fenway someday. I'm like, you will probably go to Fenway someday. That's a thing. But I just loved this kid, and it made me realize, like, oh my gosh, if I stay at this job, I'll stay at this job forever, and it's a great job, but I want to work with kids.
Mm,
And so I moved down to Philadelphia. I got a job working with kids with severe behavioral disorders. I used that to get into grad school, and my first placement was at a school for neurodivergent kids. And I was like, this is home. This is what I'm meant to do. And I've really built my whole career out of, like, I have a brain like your brain. None of us are like other people. Let's figure out how we can make our version of the world together. And it's, I mean, people really respond to it.
and what a beautiful sort of mission, right? To kind of identify like your own different view of the world and wanting to use your skills and your knowledge and your experience to help other people. I think that's kind of like the origin of authenticity, right? Where you're kind of actually trying to help people, and not necessarily just have a profession where I'm in software marketing, so I'm making a lot of other people a lot of money. It's like that's kind of how that works. But
Hooray!
um, you know, so in full honesty, like it's just the last couple years I've heard the term neurodivergent. So what I wanted to ask you is, how do you define neurodivergent, and what is that? What should people know about people who are neurodivergent?
And thank you for level setting that conversation, because it is a word that's sort of exploded out into the
Oh,
mainstream. It's
You know,
everywhere.
I had my friend on this week's episode of the show. We didn't talk about neurodiversity, but she's got a book coming out called He's Not, or They're Not Gaslighting You, which is all about how society has co-opted
Mhm.
therapy speak and diagnoses and all of this stuff,
Yeah.
and kind of normalized it. And I think this is one of those words that has just exploded, like you
Oh yeah.
said, and there's a lot of ambiguity around it. Like
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I understand
Yeah.
exactly what it is and what it isn't.
Oh my gosh. I mean, as a therapist, like when people use the words like "I'm so bipolar," I'm like, "You're wrong."
Yeah.
Or the classic. I mean, you and I are similar enough in age. I'm assuming you grew up watching Friends, right?
Oh my God, yes! I just had French trivia last night,
Yeah.
and we finished in second place, but I think there
I'm
was some shenanigans. But
about to say, I
usually
can't
we've
imagine you not winning that.
no, and we had to do a recount because they had us even lower than second place, and we were keeping our own score. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm a little triggered about that one, but
I'm so sorry.
yes, I
Yeah.
love Friends.
Well, so people will say Monica Geller is so OCD, right?
Hmm.
But Monica Geller is actually OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. It's more of a type A, rigid, got to do things my way type, whereas OCD is a series of obsessions and compulsions,
Hmm.
a behavioral thing, right? And words matter, right? I wouldn't, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, your name's Nick, but I'm going to call you Nikki, right? Like, I'm not going to choose to change that. Like, if you present to me one way, I'm going to give the accurate representation of that.
Right.
So,
It ain't Nikki, I can
yeah,
tell you
yeah, ain't Nikki, right?
that.
Yeah. It's like when people like Matthew, I'm like, I'm going to stop you right there. It's Dr. Matt. It's just
Yeah.
Matthew is only if I'm in trouble. Um, my mother and my grandmother are the
When they're like, now, Matthew, why did you feel you needed to break curfew?
oh, I hate it. Oh, I hate it. Thanks for that. Yeah, but not everybody in your life is a narcissist. Not everyone is gaslighting you. Like, use the terms. Even working primarily with kids, like he's bullying me. I'm like, bullying actually has a very discrete set of terms for it to truly be
Hmm.
bullying. Otherwise, the kid's just an asshole, and that
Yeah.
like that's a thing, right? Let's treat the kid who's an asshole, but like it is, bullying means something, and we're going to use the terms the right way.
Well, and
um
when the terms are misused, they lose all their meaning. And that isn't just in psychology, that's everywhere. When
Everywhere.
you call people stuff or you use terms incorrectly or broadly, they just lose their meaning.
Absolutely, right? I mean, if you're saying that you're gaslighting me, then you are just lowering that bar to the point where it doesn't mean anything. So then if someone actually does gaslight you later in life, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So well put.
Yeah.
That's so well put. So defining
Yes.
neurodiversity, I sidetracked us again with my little story about therapy speak, but
But
I
they're
think
good.
like
Yeah.
yeah, I think like the whole therapy speak thing, and I got an advanced copy of her book, which I've probably read about half of it now, and it's kind of like making me reflect even on this kind of stuff when I see like neurodiversity or someone DM'd me not that long ago and mentioned being neurodivergent, and I was like, I, are you? Like, I had no idea. Like, it's someone I've talked to for a while over DM, of course, but
Right.
like, are you? Or are you kind of broadly using that? And it gets confusing
Yeah.
for someone who doesn't quite know. And so that's why I'm like, how do we even define it? And because it's important to define it, because people who are deserve to have, have that. I don't label is not the right word, but have that word mean something
Yeah.
for them and their experience. That's the same thing we talked about with like narcissists
Yeah.
and people with BPD. It's
Yeah.
these people, when you just throw those terms around, the people that actually work on living with that every single day, their experience is completely demeaned. And I'm sure
Absolutely.
it's the same with this.
Yeah. I mean, I had a kid, and it's funny, OCD is actually a part of neurodivergence, right? So,
Mm.
so neurodivergence means that you have a brain that is quantifiably different. And it's almost a term that has to exist in contrast to the actual term. So a term for a person with a typical brain is neurotypical, right? About
Hmm.
80% of people are neurotypical. Their brains function more or less as we'd expect them to do for their age and place in life, right? So 4/5 of people, their brains basically work as expected. They're not the differences they have are not significant from a psychology perspective. So 1/5 of people, their brains are quantifiably different. I can point to a brain scan and be like, check it out, Nick. Your prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functioning skills live, is different than a normal brain, right? This is a typical brain. This is what your brain does. And it is so important for us to ground that work in neuroscience, because there are still people out there who think ADHD isn't real, right? There are so many people out there who think that autism is just badism. Right? It's like, these kids, they're just terrible parenting.
Wait,
I'm like,
with autism, there's still
oh,
people that think that?
I got some horror stories for you, brother. We can do that in the
Oh
post show.
man. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
um, and it's something that I can point to when I'm talking to administrators and say, these are brain scans. This is science, right? And I can show what this looks like and tell you why it manifests the way it does in people in actual reality. Because for those people, the brain dictates everything we do. So if their brain is wired to do something a different way, then they're just experiencing the world in a fundamentally different way than we are. Now, neurodivergence is never an excuse, but it's always context, right?
Okay.
So the person who's in your sales meeting, right, for you're selling your software, and they're like looking out the window and they're fiddling with something on their desk, it may look like they're being disrespectful, but if they're ADHD, they're actually doing those things to try and regulate and stay in that space, rather than being like, I'm bored, I'm leaving, and
Right.
left, right? So there's that piece of this where if you can understand the behaviors as a way of trying to regulate a brain that is not level set to the environment it finds itself in, everything makes a lot more sense.
Which it does, and that's what I like about. And I haven't read your book, but I did look into your book, and that's what I like about kind of the playbook is I often think, and this is totally different, but this concept. I'm a night owl. I hate mornings. I don't want to talk to anyone before 10 a.m. And it would probably be later if society wasn't set up for morning people. So it's like, I often think, when I'm forced to get up for work and to function at 7, 8 in the morning, and it's like my brain isn't built for that. I'd be more productive at 10 p.m. at night than I am at 8 o'clock in the morning. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think the way that the constructs of society are set up, it does create anyone who has a different brain or body function or circadian rhythm or whatever you want to call or whatever topic you want to breach. You have to like really adjust yourself to your environment, and that is difficult for anyone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you spend enough time in the bar scene, right? I was a bartender for many years. I remember being in my 20s and I'd worked a Friday night at this Jersey Shore bar, like it was called Columns. And it was just the sort of place you were just throwing Bud Lights at people and they are throwing wet cash at you. And at the end of the night, you're like, it's probably close enough. I don't care. Right. There were no registers, suffice it to say. John Taffer would have hated it. So, and you get home at 3 a.m, reeking of beer. I took a shower. I fell asleep at 4. I slept till 10:30. I woke up and my uncle was there. He was like, look who's sleeping in, right? Some of us have jobs. And I went back upstairs and I got my apron, which was still filled with wet, soggy money, and slapped it down on the table. I was like, there's $791 in here, right? Cash. So like, don't tell me I don't work. Don't tell me like, my way of being is not your way of being. It doesn't make it worse. And that's actually a fundamental tenet of the neurodiversity movement, is that differences aren't deficits.
That's a very good way to put it. Very good way to put it. So what are some of the ways that like regular everyday neurodivergent folks, like what are some of the challenges that you work with them with to help develop? I know you mentioned some of the social skills, the improv makes sense, right? Like adjusting in real time to your always changing environment. But what are some of the big skill sets that you have to work with folks on to help? And of course, that's going to be different based on, what's going on, but some of the main ones.
So one thing to think about is, so you have four lobes in your brain, right? You have your frontal lobe, your parietal lobe, I'm sorry, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe. And the temporal lobes, they do hearing and sight. This is also where our mirror neurons live. We're going to come back to that in a minute because they'll be
Okay.
important. Parietal lobe is sensation and occipital lobe is sight. So one of the things we know about neurodivergent people is that they have far more neurons in their parietal lobe. Their brains
Okay.
are hardwired to feel more things. And sometimes feeling more things means you experience like the most intense version of that. And sometimes you actually have so much connection you don't feel it at all. And so a lot of neurodivergent people, whether they are autistic, ADHD, gifted, dyslexic, OCD, dyspraxic, there's, those are many of the terms of art there. They may feel things way more than somebody else would. And because they're feeling it so much more, they're spending a lot more energy regulating themselves through that thing. So you might
And
put
that
on,
can be physical and emotional.
see, you have just the best. That was the thing. You asked the question everybody was thinking, right? Not, like, top notch. Give this guy a Webby Award.
If they're
Uh,
still listening, I hope so.
and that's just the thing. Like, I remember I worked with a kid many years ago. He was at a prep school where he had to wear a tie, and his grades had plummeted. And after a while, I was like, listen, I got to ask you, man, is this about the tie? He's like, I hate it. He's like, it's all I can think about. I can't pay attention to the teachers. This kid asked me like to hang out the other day. I was like, I can't. Like, because he was wearing it was tight up in his neck like this, right?
Oh my gosh.
And there are people out there who are going to be like, well, you just have to wear a tie. Like, that's how life works, son. Dad voice, right? And so I asked the school, I was like, listen, does he have to wear a tie? And they're like, no. We're like, great. He didn't wear a tie. He had to wear, they shifted, he wore a blazer instead. And then immediately he's the coolest kid in school because he's wearing something different.
Yeah.
Other kids are wearing blazers now. And like his grades went right back up. He became a much more pleasant kid because he's not spending 60% of his mental energy trying not to scream because he has to wear a tie, right? So sensory needs in being neurodivergent can be significant. And since we don't tend to talk about sensory needs as a society, or we don't talk about them enough, this a lot of neurodivergent people suffer in silence. One of my clients who actually lives in Greater Chicago, they were having a lot of trouble commuting to work, and they kept saying, "Well, just take the L, just take the L." You know that sound the L makes, Nick?
Yeah.
Is it a fun, pleasant sound?
No, it's loud. It's obnoxious.
Right.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. They would have sensory meltdowns on the L. So
it's like the screeching, right?
The screeching,
like
it's the worst sound ever.
It's
and
the worst
like,
sound.
I don't like it, but I can tolerate it. This is a person that was just like, whether your thing is like a metal fork in a porcelain bowl or fingernails.
Oh my God, it's so funny you say that because just last night, the girl, my girlfriend was sitting here on the couch and I made a pot roast like stew and she was eating with a fork and she was hitting the porcelain bowl and I was like, oh my God, like I have to leave the room because I know this is a me thing.
Right.
But like, I didn't even know that sound bothered me, but that just happened last night.
How uncanny is that? I mean, I actually, when I do my sensory workshop with people, and this is something, it's part of my like, how companies can handle neurodivergent employees. And I'm like, let's talk about the sensory needs because we're talking about the lights, that thing that fluorescent lights make. We talk about how doors don't shut so people can just walk in and bother you. But I was like, but then, you're in the break room and somebody's making a cup of coffee in a porcelain cup and they take the metal spoon and they put it at the bottom of the cup and I do this. And I'm not actually holding a cup or a spoon. People fall out of their chairs. A lady screamed at me. She's like, don't! I'm like,
oh my gosh.
Man, there's nothing actually happened. Look, there's nothing up my sleeve, right? And it was, that's the way that sensory experiences can absolutely redline us. But if you didn't have a partner who understood you, or you didn't have that self-awareness that makes you, without context for understanding how your brain is different, the only explanation your brain has is it's your fault. There's something broken about you, Nick, right?
Yeah.
And so many people are walking around thinking everybody else can wear ties or bras or high heel shoes or wear makeup or a million other things, I can't. I'm a freak. I'm broken, right?
Mm.
But if I can point that person and be like, hey, this is a legitimate, measurable brain difference, check it out, then we're giving that person a pathway to feeling better and having that self-compassion.
And that's what I think. Again, I keep bringing this back to the conversation with my friend about her book, Dr. Isabel, and that was one of the things that we talked about was, and this is a little bit different, but like the diagnosis and how like people throw, oh, my ex is a narcissist, all this stuff, all that, throwing these terms out, and there's very, the DSM-5 is very strict criteria for diagnosing, and there's context involved in all that, but it's the same with this. It sounds like where you can get a diagnosis and it kind of gives you that like peace of mind to know like, oh, there's not something wrong with me, right? And instead it gives you like a path forward for like treatment or management or whatever that is. And would you say that's the same here? Is like if you find out there's something literally in your brain that's causing the porcelain bowl sound to I don't even know what the word is, but like get you overwhelmed or overstimulated, then it's kind of like you can move forward with a management of it or learning how to manage it or learning new skills to not let it be so overstimulating.
I
Is
mean,
that fair?
you nailed it. That's exactly
Okay.
it. Um,
I love the countdown. It's always like so anticipatory.
very dramatic.
It is. It is. All right. Welcome to this episode of Eyes Wide Open. Our guest today is Dr. Matt Zakreski. Dr. Matt is a clinical psychologist specializing in working with neurodivergent people. He's also a public speaker, co-founder of the Neurodivergent Collective, which is a mental health practice that is focused on delivering personalized care for ADHD and autistic adults. He's also the best-selling author of a new book called Neurodiversity Playbook. Neurodivergent people can crack the code of living in a neurotypical world. He's also the host of a podcast called Nerding Out on Neurodiversity. And I'm excited to have you on today, talk everything you're doing to change the world and all the work you're doing. That's good work. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Nick, I'm great, and I'm so excited to be here. I mean, it is such a treat to get to talk to somebody outside of my field, but somebody who has a huge platform. So like when someone like you reaches out to someone like me, say, "Hey, let's learn more about this." You help so many people, and it's a treat, man. I'm excited.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you taking the time because kind of like my ethos of this show it's changed a little bit, but it's been really like, what am I curious about? What do I think the world needs to know more about? And then like, I feel like the genuine curiosity sparks a lot of other people's curiosity. And then when we have people like you who are doing such good work in the world come on and spend your time with us talking about it in kind of layman's terms, I think it's really valuable for the audience. And that's one of the things that people say to me or even leave in reviews is, oh, you always ask the next question I was wondering. So I think that curiosity is out there for a lot of people and not a lot of opportunity to get it all the time. So thank you for being willing to share your time.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's very similar to like if you have a gluten intolerance,
Which I
right?
do.
Right. And I was like, I think you said that at one of the interviews. I did my homework, right? So if you kept going out to Italian food and you kept eating bread and you felt like shit afterwards, you'd be like, maybe it's the chef. Maybe they didn't wash my hands. Maybe they didn't like my seasons. They spit in the food.
I'm sure that's happened. I don't like to think about it.
You were very likable.
Thank you.
And so without that explanation, you might just keep doubling down on this thing, right? And and then just keep failing and feeling bad and feeling worse. But if you realize, and sometimes it takes that outside person to say, hey man, listen, you are sick for 3 days every time we go out for Italian. What if you tried not eating gluten for a minute? Just see what happens, right? Do a test. You try the rice noodles next time. You don't feel sick for 3 days. You go, whoa, maybe I'm not broken. Maybe there's just something about how my brain and body works that has me show up in the world differently. And unfortunately, the world is filled with gluten, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you've got to make a lot of intentional choices to navigate that. But once you know what's up, then you've got that playbook to navigate the world. Like you go on the gluten-free forums, you're like, here are the 11 best restaurants in Chicago
Yeah.
that are gluten-free. And you're like, it's like, oh my God, it's like in Wizard of Oz when she opens the door and it's color. You're like, life can be rich again,
That was when I found gluten-free pizza in Chicago for the first time, like 10 years ago. It
right?
was like heaven opened up, an angel came down and delivered that pizza to me.
There's nothing
It's
like,
like no more cardboard tasting Udi's gluten-free
yeah.
pizza. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
brutal. No, that's a really good way to look at it. And one of the things that I find helpful, but also challenging, is social media has done such a good job of normalizing things like neurodiversity. But kind of like we talked about earlier, it also muddies the water a little bit. And so, one of the things I like to ask when I have sort of a mental health expert of some sort on the show is, what are your thoughts on social media and the pros and cons of how it helps remove stigma, but at the same time can sort of muddy those waters? Like, how do we navigate that as general consumers of social media, people who want to be accepting and understanding, but also, everyone's a narcissist, or everything that may or may not be OCD or neurodiversity. You can kind of find something to support anything you think.
Yeah. Yeah, and you named it beautifully because it really is a double-edged sword. I mean, so I was identified gifted in second grade, and there was not a
And what
lot of.
does gifted mean, like
Ooh.
in your view?
So gifted is, it has a seat at the table for neurodivergence. There's a lot of pieces of the gifted brain that are different. From a measurement perspective, it's an IQ score of 130 or higher. So that's two standard
Okay.
deviations above the mean. It's in the 98th percentile. So it is a significantly different thing. Now you'll notice I use the word different, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's this perception out there that gifted means better, and I don't think that's true. I think that
It's different.
it's just I often use the metaphor. It's like if you had a buddy who was 6'10", right? Your buddy's 6'10". He can't buy pants at Target. Target does
No.
not sell pants for
I'm
someone,
6'5". I can barely buy
right?
pants at Target. So someone who's 6'10", yeah.
Yeah, and that is several standard deviations above the mean for the average American male in height, which I believe is 5'10". So
It's
I'm
5'10".
6 foot, so I'm really close to average. You are somewhere in either high average or superior based on those measures, right? But no one
Let's
is
go with
saying,
superior.
I like it, sounds better, right? But no one is saying that Nick is superior compared to another person. Your height is just higher than the average person, so thus you need different things.
Mm.
So gifted has a lot of baggage around that. Um, but
Well, I even
because
think when I was a kid, gifted was almost like it wasn't like negative, but it was almost like, oh, this person in the class is gifted. And it was kind of a label that would almost make you think differently about them or less than of them.
absolutely,
Is
yep,
that okay?
yeah, it's like, this person's going to be your boss someday, so be nice to them now, which always translated as beat the shit out of them on the playground now.
Show them
Give
who's
them,
boss
yeah,
now.
give them some school trauma. That'll help. You know, and it's really, being gifted is so much more than being smart, right? It comes with a lot of social challenges and emotional challenges and sensory challenges, which we've discussed. And that, and certainly growing up in the 90s, that was not a thing that they told me. It was just, oh, you're really smart. You're going to go to Harvard
Mm,
someday. I was like, neat. I don't know. I'm
what's
9 years
Harvard?
old. What does that mean to me, right?
Yeah.
I know I could do Legos faster than most people, and that I really always
Okay.
was good at word searches, right? And those things were cool until they were really, really not cool. Until they really made my
Mm,
life a lot harder. Um, so that journey through always feeling different, that journey of, there wasn't a lot of accessible information. Now we've got the almost the opposite problem where there's so much information. And that
Mm-hmm.
includes misinformation, right? There are very popular TikTok channels that are like, you can, giant air quotes, cure your ADHD by not eating red dye 40, right? Or if you have more alkaline water, you won't be autistic. And it's just like, listen, these are brain differences, right? This
Mm-hmm.
isn't like, oh, I caught a cold and I need to take some ibuprofen. This
Right.
is, it's like if you were diabetic, right? You take medicine to manage something, but your body just processes insulin differently.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so important to have that knowledge out there. But what I tell my clients, especially when I talk to young people, is like, listen, bring your questions, bring your TikToks, because if they're right, I am happy to reinforce that and amplify that message. If they're wrong, let me tell you what they're missing, right? Because
Mm.
I would rather someone come to me with a thing and I can send them in the right direction rather than gatekeeping that and be like, no, that's
Yeah.
not what OCD is, you fool. And
Well,
then,
and if that's another therapist, another psychologist on there, then you're like fighting your peers over
yeah,
that.
oh, let me tell, I mean, so one of the ways that giftedness shows up specifically in the neurodivergent space is the concept of what we call twice exceptionality. So that's when
Okay.
you're gifted and you have a second learning difference. So in my case, gifted in ADHD, right?
Okay.
And I was in a meeting with a very wealthy district, very fancy and well-respected school psychologist. And the guy looks at me, he's like, Matt, a kid can't be gifted and autistic. And I'm like, really? I got several dozen examples I can give you, boss. And he's like, he looks at me, he's like, you haven't been in the field long enough. And I looked at him and I was like, you've been in the field too long.
Too long. Yeah. It's
Right?
initially what I thought when you said that. I was like, this guy, I was going to ask, how old is he? How long has he been in the field?
I mean, like he was in his 80s then. I don't know if he's still practicing, but I mean, just the field continues to move and evolve, and we must move and evolve with it.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm fighting my own colleagues. Thankfully,
Yeah.
most of the time I'm fighting is the wrong word. I am trying to educate lay people, right? I think
Yeah.
most people don't know what they don't know. So if you can give them that with empathy and grace, they're like, oh, check that out. Right. I did
Mm-hmm.
a neurodiversity talk to this hedge fund finance bro thing here in New York City. And you wouldn't think they were down with it, but like I was like, listen, guys, you've probably gotten some misinformation about this. Let me tell you how this thing shows up and let me see how it can make your business better. By the end of the hour and a half, they were like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Because I didn't talk to them like they were idiots. Right. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I always one of my psychology go-to expressions is you can't shame someone into feeling better.
Mm.
Right. So like if I
Yes.
shamed these guys, these bros, they would have been like, well, get out of here. We don't want
They get
to.
defensive.
Right. When you're defensive, you can't listen, you can't learn. But by saying, here's what you might think, and here's another way to think about that stuff, then we don't call people out, we call people in, right? We called them in,
Mm.
and
I need
several
to
of
do
them,
more of that.
yeah,
I call
it's
people out sometimes.
it's hard. It's so hard, you
It
know,
is.
because it takes time and energy and effort. And sometimes it is just a lot easier to be like, you're wrong, put them on blast, right?
Yep. Yep.
You just send them
Yep.
my way. I'll be the soft
I'll
landing.
I'll do that. Like I can't. I don't have the capacity to
Yeah,
be soft here, so I'm going to just send you to Dr. Matt, and
yeah,
he'll ease you in.
yeah,
But
right.
one of the interesting things again when it comes to even the DSM and different diagnosis for mental health conditions, everything is so nuanced and there's so much context that to sit here and say you can't be both of those things, you can't be gifted and you can't have ADHD, or you can't have this and you can't have that, like everything is so nuanced and context matters. You can take someone and you can put them on the L every day and their life experience is going to be totally different than never putting them near the L.
Yeah,
So it's like that context matters. And I think that what happens on social media, to tie it back to that, is, and I think therapists by and large do a very good job of saying things on social media like, I'm not your therapist, this isn't a replacement for therapy, all of those kind of disclaimers that they put in their posts and stuff. But I think that what it does is it takes something like neurodiversity and it defines it, but it defines it in a general way without the context of the individual person. And that is so much of what therapy and learning social skills and learning skills to manage whatever it is that you have going on. And that is just lacks context on social media. And I think that's what causes so much of the harm and the confusion and the throwing these terminologies around without actually knowing what they mean.
Yeah. And, it's one of the reasons I'm bad at, I guess, contemporary social media, right? Because every time I try to make a video, I'm like, here's the thing you need to know about ADHD. And then I talk for 45 minutes about one point because there's so much nuance. My brain's like, I can't just say, oh, do this because, well, it's not accurate, right? And,
Right.
And listen, there's a lot of great ADHD content out there. There's a lot of great autistic content out there. They've mastered how to do that. Unfortunately, that's not how my brain works. So, I do more of the text-based things or a funny meme, and that works for me, right?
Yeah, that's the one thing I learned about with this whole show experience is everyone for so long was telling me what to do on social media. And I was like, honestly, like none of this feels like me. So I'm just going to be me. And me on social media is posting when I feel like posting, if I have something to say or have something to share. And a lot of times it is going to be a meme because I love memes and I find them an easy way to communicate without being super aggressive on a lot of it. I do think on social media, like people put a lot of pressure on themselves, especially when you've got a mission or a business or whatever. And really, if you just show up as yourself when you feel like it and when it's best for you, I think that's the best. But based on some of the stuff we've talked about, and one of the things that I know you talk about in your talks and in your work, but you are not your thoughts is something that I've heard you talk about before. What do you mean by that? Because I think a lot of people do get defined by their thoughts, and their thoughts inform, some of their actions that may not be the actions they actually want to take.
Absolutely. So this is going to be a fun exercise we can do as a podcast community, right? So
Ooh, I love it.
All right. So Nick, what I'd like you to do, and everyone out there listening, I want you to think of a giraffe. Think of a giraffe in your brain. Okay. Got your giraffe?
Yep.
Cool. Now, snap your fingers, make it purple.
Okay.
Got your purple giraffe in your head. Now,
I'm trying to decide like how it's purple though. That's where is it the spots are purple? Is it the other underlying part? Is it both? Are they different shades of purple? That's where I'm at.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm colorblind, so I can't tell the difference. So I'm going to just have to trust you. So we've got your purple giraffe, however you choose to make it purple. And I want you to put that purple giraffe in some sort of vehicle, right? It could be a skateboard. It could be a sports car. It could be the Goodyear blimp, right? So
okay.
What vehicle do you put your purple giraffe in?
He's in a pickup truck.
Love it. Very common answer, right? It's a really good vehicle for a for a giraffe. Now, Nick, I want you to do me a favor. You can see that clearly in your head, right? The purple giraffe in a pickup truck. Now, look around your studio. Look around where you are. Do you see any purple giraffes running about?
No.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, if you do see them, please contact
I'd like to see one outside. Yeah, I'd love to see one outside.
Right. Yeah, there we go. Very nice. So I call this the purple giraffe test because you can call an image to mind so clearly. Our brains are very powerful. Mm-hmm. And you had an emotional response to that image of a purple giraffe, regardless of what that emotional response is. But just because we can think about the purple giraffe doesn't make it real. So just because we think it doesn't make it real. So you could have gone on a great date and thought to yourself, this is awesome. I might marry this person. And then 10 minutes later, you get a text like, listen, that was great, but I don't see us going anywhere. Right? Your version.
It's happened many a times.
I don't miss dating, that's for sure. And, so then you're like, my perception of the world, this thought I had was inaccurate. It was wrong. And I feel some sort of way about that. So the fundamental triad in psychology is thoughts lead to feelings, lead to behaviors, and our behaviors reinforce our thoughts. So
Mm.
if you think your girlfriend's mad at you, if you have that thought in your head, what emotions come up when you think your girlfriend's mad at you?
Ooh, what did I do? Now I'm upset. I'm a little anxious.
Right? There's a spiral that shows
Yeah.
up, right?
Yeah.
We call this rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Super not fun. So if you think your girlfriend's mad at you and you feel bad about it, how might you change your behavior because you feel bad?
Well, now since I act in my whole philosophy on dating and being in a relationship is I'm going to act like a secure person until I am one.
Mm-hmm.
So I would
Love
run
that.
it through
Love
that,
that.
and I would probably ask, are you upset with me, or did I do something that upset you?
Mm-hmm.
And try and do that. But before, I would probably spiral about it and wonder what it could have been, or what, and just rehash everything over and over and over.
Right. So we'll talk about Nick 1.0 here as opposed to Nick 2.0. Nick 1.0, feeling bad, you withdraw, you retreat, you
Mm-hmm.
get defensive. And sooner or later, your partner notices, like, Nick, you're acting weird, buddy. What's up? You're like, oh, wouldn't you know? Right. And what that
Exactly.
does, that behavior reinforces the thought, see, they were mad at me. Yay.
It's a
Right.
self-fulfilling
It's a
prophecy.
self-fulfilling prophecy because the way our brains work is our brains would rather have a narrative that's wrong than no narrative at all. Our brains seek to understand. They want narratives, they want explanation, they want context,
Mm.
right? So it's like sometimes your partner's just having a bad day and it's got nothing to do with you. But if you freak out about it, you'll make it about yourself and then insert yourself in that triangle we talked about until your behaviors justify them being mad at you. And your brain's like, at least I know. At least I know I'm
Yeah.
right. And it's a thing that we all do, but when you become aware of it, you can start stepping out of that process. But hold on, I'm doing that
Right.
thing. I'm doing that thing. I'm making this about me. It's not about me, right? Sorry,
Right.
sweetie. Tell me about your day. Tell me what's wrong. I'll help you if I can. By shifting that perspective, right? Then a different feeling flows from that thought, and then a different
Mm.
behavior flows from that feeling, and then hopefully that behavior reinforces that different thought. Look at me being a good, helpful partner here, and then we send ourselves in a virtuous spiral, not a vicious one.
Oh, if it was just that easy for everyone, we would be such a better place
Yeah.
as society, and so much less isolation and loneliness and toxic cycles and all of this stuff that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's really hard, and it's made harder by the fact that we are all overwhelmed and overworked and underpaid, and we're bombarded by notifications. I mean, I don't.
Oh, that's where I want to go next.
Oh,
Let's
good. I
talk,
love it.
because I think it kind of ties into the executive functioning, which we talked about a little bit briefly before we got going here. But like, and this is, so I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'm glad this came up. So, one of the things that sparked me working with my therapist on my executive functioning is that for the last 6, 7 months, I have felt so cooked, so burnt out, so overwhelmed constantly that like I feel like I'm just getting and so notification wise, several years ago, I shut off my social media notifications. I only get social media when I go into social media on my terms when I want to go in and look. And even then, I don't even always go in and look at my notifications or look at my messages because I found once I got a ton of followers, it was incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah.
So now what I find is that when I'm at work, it's Teams, it's emails, it's team chats, it's group chats, and then you pick up your phone and it's text messages, it's group text messages, it's notifications, it's emails, it's all of this stuff constantly come. And I'm like, I don't know where to go first. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what. I'm sorry, text messaging friends and family, like that's not a priority right now.
Yeah.
And when people need stuff from you at work and stuff, but you're trying to get into like your deep work flow or whatever it is, and you're in meetings all day and you're talking about different things and there's no breaks, and then the notifications are there, and then there's the emails you got to respond to and the Teams messages you got to respond to, and boom, there's another email that came in, and boom, you've got another meeting coming. It's just like we are so inundated with notifications and tasks and people wanting stuff that I I feel like it just cooks our brains. And then when you look at Gen Z, who I have a lot of empathy for, who's already getting the same reputation millennials got of being lazy and not wanting to work hard. And I think about how they grow up spending hours a day on TikTok, locked down in COVID, finishing their informative years of college digitally,
Mhm.
not getting the normal social interactions that generations got before, growing up on social media, and then expected to do all of this stuff with jobs and be social when they were not social for the last several years. And I'm like, I feel for them. They're
Mhm.
totally burnt out coming into the workforce in the same way like I'm feeling burnt out now.
Yeah.
So what do we do? Like, what do we do? Because I feel like you can shut off notifications all you want, but that stuff's still going to be there when you go and look on your own.
Yeah.
I'm just complaining now. I don't even know if I had a question, but feel free to chime in.
So it is in many ways a, if not an unsolvable problem, we're certainly not putting that genie back in the bottle, right? It
Mm-hmm.
is what it is at this point. One of the things, and you're seeing a lot of younger people going back to the old school flip phone, right? We're more or less the same age. You remember your flip? You remember when you had a flip
Oh
phone?
yeah, yeah.
Moto Razor, baby, flip.
I worked at Motorola when the Razor was my first
Yes.
job.
Oh gosh, I miss it.
Which color did you have?
Um, I, I, the color blindness
Probably
gets me again.
multiple color. Oh, I forget. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. It was like purple or magenta. It was like
Okay,
the
yeah.
cheap model, and they were like, "Oh, you
The
got this."
V3. That's
Yeah,
the V3.
man, you must have been awesome at that job. I would probably buy like a phone
um.
for every outfit. Been like, okay, Nick, whatever you need, man.
Oh my God. Well, I worked in the mobile division
Yeah.
in the retail side, and I was very much like into trying all the new phones before they came out, and like just any color I could imagine, swapping out for the sake of swapping out. Like just had it was the best time. But what it did do is it spoiled me. So now I buy a new phone every year.
Whereas like I will like I'm using my Android, S6 until it explodes. I'm like, nope, it's fine. Like you're on your phone a lot. You could probably upgrade to it. Or I was like, or I could do several other things, right? I don't love change, not my strength. Um, well, so you see kids going back to the flip phones, but one of the things that I have found is that the since the work will never end, that can bury you or it can free you. You're never going to get to the bottom of your emails. You are never going to respond to all the text messages. You are never going to click on all the notifications. It's not possible. Now you can make like Sisyphus and keep trying to push that boulder up the hill, or you'd be like, yeah, man, it's an unsolvable problem, right? And as such, it frees me to do the parts of this that I can, right?
Mm,
So this is a helpful person for anyone, and helpful mindset for anyone out there who's struggling with this. It's top down versus bottom up thinking, right? So when we do top down thinking, we assume 100% is right and anything less than 100% is bad. You take a test, you get a 94 on it. Gee, is 94 a good grade on a test?
for me, it would be terrible test taker.
Right. And but for some people, top down thinking is going to go, I got two wrong, right? So here I am,
Yeah.
getting a 94, I got two wrong. If the first thing you see is something negative, it predisposes you to feel bad about it. But if you invert that process and do bottom up thinking, right, the default is zero. The default is you
Mm,
do nothing. You never got out of bed today to even take the damn test. So every question you answer, every step you take, every shirt you put on moves you closer to this goal. So instead of saying, I got two wrong to get a 94, I knew 94% of the information. That's pretty freaking fantastic, right?
mm, that's
You're never going to
true.
get every sales lead. Nobody does that. But if you got 53% of them this quarter, try and get 60% of them next quarter. It's value added. It's bottom up thinking, right? The more stressed
Mm,
out we get, the more like the only way to survive the world is to be perfect, right? But since nobody can be perfect and the job is if is essentially impossible, then we can step out of that circle and say, yeah, you know what? Since I can't do it perfectly, I can release that expectation and trust myself to do the parts I can as well as I can. And
Hmm.
the more you can do that kind of thinking, the gentler you'll be on yourself and the easier the rest of your life will become.
That's a really good point. And I don't do that. I look at my days and my to-do lists, and, this is what prompted me to start talking about this a few weeks back with my therapist was I do too much. I keep myself too busy on purpose, I've realized. And so when I'm, I've got a full-time job, I manage five people now. I have individual responsibilities there. Like I'm on calls 6, 7 hours most days, all of this stuff is a lot. And then I've got, the UCAN Foundation, which is, I'm busy with that. I've got the podcast. I just started singles events in Chicago. I just keep doing more and more and more. And then at the end of the day, I'm actually don't feel like I'm doing anything
Yep.
because it's so much. And when I step back, I've done it with the email before where I'm just like, you know what? I hate having unreads in my work email. I don't mind it in my regular email, but my work email, I hate having it. So there's times where I'm just like, mark it all red. And
Yep.
then if they come back, we'll address the situation as it as it comes up. But it is really hard to kind of like prioritize what's important. And I'm very aware that when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority.
Yep.
But that's where I feel like a lot of people look at it the way you're saying, where you look at the top down approach and you're looking at all of the things you're not getting done. And then it also kind of discourages you and gets you
Absolutely.
feeling defeated.
Yep.
And I think maybe that's where a lot of people start to get those feelings of burnout, or, that's another term. Like other countries have it clinically defined as things that happen in your brain.
Right.
And we don't do that here, or at least that I've seen. Because like when I worked at a Swedish, so I'm like rambling now. I worked at a Swedish company, and they literally have like diagnosis of burnout, in which people then get like time off of work, like medical leave off of work to recharge, and like guaranteed their job when they come back. Like, could you imagine that ever happening here? Like
God,
in this country?
I would throw a parade if it ever did. Yeah.
Same.
Oh my gosh. Well, and that sort of, if you focus on everything, you focus on nothing, that ties it back into the executive functioning thing we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you live in Chicago. Can you imagine if O'Hare didn't have an air traffic controller?
Oh my God.
What would happen?
Uh, Bad landings, crashes. Would probably be just horrendous. I can't even
Right?
imagine.
Because
Yeah.
every plane would be trying to land at the same time, or they'd
Like
all
the
go,
eye
oh my God,
test.
somebody else is trying to land, so I'm going to just keep circling the airport. And it's this like panic. Well, unfortunately, the more stressed out we get, the weaker that part of that executive functioning part gets. And our executive functioning part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, loses the ability to triage, right?
Mm.
So it's like, okay, I have to, I have a cup of coffee, I have a notification on my phone, I have a work email, I've got to get across town to this meeting, I didn't put on shoes, and my girlfriend wanted me to go pick up milk on the way home, right? So your brain goes, all of those things are equally important, I have to do them all right now. And it's like, I'm going to make an old school pop culture reference here. Do you remember in the Three Stooges when they would all try to walk through the door at the same time?
Yes.
Like,
And they would not. Yep.
now you can't do anything, right? So it takes you basically learn to become your own air traffic controller. It's like, okay, I know I want to do this thing. I also know that I can do this thing in an hour and no one will be the wiser. I also know I cannot leave the house without shoes. So I can do
Mm-hmm.
that first. I can tell my girlfriend, yes, I will pick up my milk on the way home. I'll set myself a reminder in my phone so I don't forget. Email I can read as I'm walking down the stairs, or if we're being healthier with our social media, once you're in the Uber or the L across town, like, but you can start knocking things down. It would be like trying to read all 28 chapters of a book at once. You can't do
Mm.
it. It's not possible,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, I'm going to read page one, word one, sentence one, and let the thing flow from there. And you'll find that by trying not to get everything done at once, you end up getting more done, even if it takes a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. What I did for, and really quickly, like, what is executive functioning? Because I
Yeah.
thought that would be something that like an executive at a business would only do, but it's actually everyone.
It's actually, yeah. And
Yeah.
one of the things that's really interesting about being neurodivergent is that basically every neurodivergence comes with some sort of executive dysfunction, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
autism, ADHD being primary culprit, but even giftedness comes with some executive dysfunction. It's where the idea of the absent-minded professor comes from. I'm so smart, I'm not paying attention. I showed up to class to
Mm.
lecture and I forgot the test. That sort of thing, right?
Okay.
So, executive functioning, broadly defined, is all the skills we need to maintain doing tasks. So, it's task initiation, task completion, time management, organization, um, it's working memory, and it's behavioral inhibition, right? Because if you sit down at your desk, like, I'm going to write this email, and then your phone goes, and you're like, and you look over to your phone,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't inhibit the behavior or stop the behavior that says, I need to look at my phone right now. Whereas the executive in your brain's like, finish the damn email, Nick. Nick, you have to finish the email.
Yeah.
And I when I wasn't taking medication for my ADHD, I always described as things were buzzing in my house. Like I'd be sitting there trying
Mm.
to do reading for grad school, like I haven't done the dishes. I need to put my laundry away. I
Mm.
know there's a Phillies game on right now because I lived in Philadelphia at the time, and it would just feel like those things were buzzing in my brain, and it just took a lot of energy to inhibit the behavior to go do those things to keep doing the behavior I was doing, which was reading my textbook, right?
Right.
So, and this is a thing where therapy and training and coaching can be so helpful to develop the skills to manage executive dysfunction, but for a lot of people giving your brain a fighting chance medically helps us work smart, not hard. And that can be a
Right.
huge benefit for a lot of people.
Right. No, that's spot on. And I think the prioritization I think is really important. Like what I did, she had me track for 2 days, like everything that I did. And what was super, she actually was like, it sounds like you're actually functioning maybe too well. like, but what was interesting to me that I realized is I'm like always multitasking
Yep.
because I would sit there and I was like, I've got this call from 9 to 10 a.m., let's just say. But then when I started paying attention to what I'm doing, I'm on this call, but I'm also working on this thing or editing this thing or building this slide or doing, so I'm always doing like two things, three things at once. Or I would say to myself, I'm like, it's weird because like I take time out of my day and go for a walk. And then, I went for a walk and I was walking to get coffee and I realized I was answering emails the whole time and then editing a podcast clip. And it's like I'm actually not walking or relaxing or recharging. So I think it's like a um, weird thing that we do where even if you can prioritize, even if you are functioning at a high level, like part of that functioning needs to be taking breaks and actual time to recharge and be present and be in the moment and not thinking about the 52 emails and the 27 text messages and, your to-do list for work and home and all of that stuff.
Oh my gosh.
There's always something else to do.
Always, right? And this is a lovely metaphor to sort of keep in mind as you struggle with this sort of stuff. Like, but we've been talking a lot about our phones. There's a big difference between not using your phone and charging your phone,
Okay.
right? So if I'm not using my phone right now. My phone is currently not being used, so it's maintaining its battery more or less. But right now, my phone could be charging because I'm not using it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it'd be refilling its tank, recharging the battery, right? So it's more functional later. So if you are taking a walk to recharge, but not recharging, then all you're doing is spending energy. Now, listen, going for a walk is an objectively healthy thing to do. Good job. That's great. Keep going on walks.
Mm-hmm.
But just imagine if you gave yourself permission to like put your phone on airplane mode, put on a podcast that you wanted to listen to for yourself, and then walk around the Miracle Mile or whatever the heck you want to do, right? And like
Right.
you will come back to your apartment or office more recharged because you did the equivalent of not just not using your phone but charging your phone. And that's
That's so well
and that's
put.
a really it's an investment you make in yourself, and the dividends it will pay are just off the chart. You will just be like, I didn't know I could feel quite this good.
That's a good point. I used to do tech-free walks, and I kind of fell out of that, and I think I need to get back to that. I think that's a good thing for everyone to do. Even if you're listening to a podcast or music or whatever it is, like turn on airplane mode and take in some fresh air. I think it's good. Yeah. So I want to get us wrapped up here and be respectful of your time, but we didn't exactly get into your book per se, although I'm sure we pulled little parts of it out in this conversation. But you have a book that came out last month in December of 2024, right?
Yes.
Tell us about your book and what people can expect if they want to check that out, and what your goal with it was.
Yeah. So I wanted to. The biggest problem with my job is that I can only really help one person at a time,
Hmm.
right? If I'm doing therapy, I'm helping one person at a time. And then I started doing more talks, which means, okay, cool. Now I'm speaking to a room of 500 people, 2,000 people, right? Um, and I'm helping all those people. But then it's still that sort of zero sum game where
Yeah.
I can only be doing one talk at a time, right?
Hmm.
And so I realized that I need to create stuff that allows me to help people when I'm not there. So the book really turned into like, what are the things I want people to know? Like, what are my go-to sayings? What are my strategies? What's the story? What are the stories that I think will help people in their own lives? And have that be something that's evergreen, right? Because you can flip to page
Hmm.
117 in my book and read how to effectively do small talk, because that's the thing a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with. So it's like, hey, let me just reread page 117 before I go to this mixer. I am recharged at this. I go and I'm more successful at small talk than I would have been, right? Rather than that
That's
person
good.
texting or calling me as their therapist, like, how the hell do I small talk? But like, if I'm on a plane or seeing another client and I can't get that message, not only am I not helping that client, I feel like I'm letting them down. So
Hmm.
it just became this sort of repository of like, these are my best professional talks. This is my best therapy advice. These are funny stories that you will remember so you can call this memory to mind. And the feedback we've gotten from it has been like, the ethos has really come through. People have been like,
That's
it's helpful, it's tangible, it's practical. And, I just, it makes your heart happy to have created something that can help a lot of people.
That's awesome. Good for you. And I'm glad you did that, because it isn't, it isn't something I've really seen. I've seen, there's obviously like self-help books and stuff like that, but kind of taking the practicality of it. And God, I might need that page 117, because I hate small talk. I'm not good at it. I think that could be helpful to me, but no, that's great. And again, the work that you're doing, and this conversation we've had has been so enlightening for me specifically. And I feel so much better, just understanding the neurodivergent mind and the people that are their life experience of living with a neurodivergent mind is very eye-opening, for no pun intended. But I appreciate you and the work that you're
You got it
doing.
in there. Good job.
I know. I think that's actually the first time I've ever said that, ironically, on this show. So before we head out, I'll give you a chance if you have anything you want to ask me. Now's your chance.
I mean, oh my gosh, like what? Well, let me ask you this, because as a mental health professional, I am of course always in a position of like, I'm curious about people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you are someone who life went through a major change, a huge shift, right?
Several.
Several, right?
Yeah.
Here we are in 2025 recording this podcast. Do you think that you've been able to sort of knit together those experiences to make Nick 3.0 even? Or do you think
So
that's still like a challenge?
so it's still a challenge, but I've kind of come to um, this. I really came to this realization probably about a year ago, where I'm a pretty confident person. I believe in myself, and I trust that I'm doing the right thing with the information that I have. And that's something that I've worked really hard to kind of accept and learn about myself over the years. And this whole last few years of, um, you know, 15 minutes of fame and being going from a point where you couldn't like leave the house without getting recognized to going through a public divorce to being disparaged and all the stuff that has happened. And what I realized like a year ago is I'm really fucking resilient. Like I now believe, and I've battled depression my whole life, and I didn't even know until maybe my late 20s that that's what was going on. And so, kind of having, and then I didn't know what to do with it.
Yep.
Right. So then I'm like, okay, this is great. Now what? And so one of the things that like I've really realized is I'm very resilient and I can handle anything. And there's nothing that hasn't been, I mean, there's probably things that haven't been said or done, but like I have come to the point where like I don't really care what other people think about me. I am going to do what I think is the right thing to do and act with integrity at every point in my life. And I find so much peace in that, and so much peace in feeling like I can actually handle anything. I can do it alone. And as lonely as that is sometimes, which it is, and that's its own issue
Yeah.
to work through, I'd say that'd be like 3.0 is how to handle some of the loneliness that comes with some of the stuff that I do and ways that I feel and stuff that I focus on. So I think maybe that's 3.0 is managing some of the isolation and the loneliness that comes with it. But I just feel like I can handle anything.
Yeah.
And that is such a peaceful, inner peaceful thing that I have where like, I'm not, of course, like I'm still, nervous about being in a relationship or like getting married or like stuff like that. Of course, like I actually recently realized I have some social anxiety that I've never had before when I'm in a crowded place and people are, recognizing me and I'm, I'm with the girl I'm dating now. And it's like, this is, it's a little bit of like a different experience, but I just find grounding in the fact that I believe in my soul and in my heart that I can handle anything. And that just gives me this peace inside that I think I've never really had before. All of this stuff the last several years.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
It makes all the sense in the world. And it's a beautiful thing to hear because you're running through your values, right? You are leading with the things that matter to you, and you are taking the time to say, like, my life has changed, right? Like, you have gone through many things that are, unchangeable, right? They happened, and you're not pretending that you were the same Nick that you were in 2015, right? Like, this is,
right.
And there is a humility that comes with that. I always joke that I'm a much better driver now that I have kids, right? Like I can't drive like I'm 27 anymore.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, red lights are for suckers. Let's go. Right?
So
like,
relatable.
yeah, there's a humility that comes with that. And, the thing that, to broadly speak, right? Like, reality stars are not exactly known for their humility, right? And
I've noticed.
and the more I dug into learning about you, the more I was like, this is a person who seems to have come out this side, like with their eyes wide open, like, oh my gosh, like, you know what? Like, let me position myself as a humble vessel to receive things and be curious. And I'm like, this is the sort of person I want to talk to. Right. And so I just, you are modeling so many positive things for so many people because this is what it looks like. This is what healing and growth looks like. It's not pretty. It's not sexy. It's not on the cover of page 6, right? It's the grunt work that you do behind the closed doors. But then you work up one day, you're like, look at me in a healthy relationship. Look at me taking care of myself. These are the seeds I planted that are now bearing fruit. So just, I wanted to take a moment to amplify that part of your personal growth because it just feels like a thing that you should get more credit for.
That is very kind. I just got goosebumps. I really appreciate you saying that. It's very kind of you to say that. And I do think, it's, I look at kind of this year and my friends and I, probably in November, I don't do New Year's resolutions. If I want to make a change or I think there needs to be a change, I make the change starting that day or maybe the next day. And one of the things we were doing was like, oh, what's New Year's resolutions? I was like, I don't really have them. But what I do have for this year, 2025, is at the end of the year, I want to look back on 2025 and say, this is the best year of my life. And so now everything I'm doing is this going to contribute to being the best year of my life? And so it's kind of like, maybe that's 3.0, right? Like, I don't know. I haven't really thought of it that way before, but you saying that, I really appreciate it. And I do feel validated in a sense of being seen for, kind of some of the changes that I've made and some of the stuff I've gone through and how I'm trying to make things better coming out the other side and grow personally at the same time.
It's hard enough, and doing it in those public spotlights is even harder. So, it's
Thank
just, one of my favorite things to say is it's easy to say when it's true, and,
Yeah.
You've done a good job. So, I tip my cap to you because it makes my job easier when people like you are out there being so humble and vulnerable. And, people are going to listen to this podcast and maybe however many listeners try therapy for the first time or try a new medication or ask for help. And, that's the way it gets better. It's just a million little victories.
Yeah.
And then we look up and we've gotten out of how hard things can be, and they're a little bit better.
I think you're spot on there. And that's a great way to look at it. And if you are out there and you're listening, especially, and we didn't even talk about being a guy in the mental health field that's primarily dominated by women, but we'll have to plan to do a second episode because I think we could talk about a lot more.
I would love to. I mean, yes, we could fill up all the time. So
absolutely. All right. So tell people where they can find you, and those links will be in the show notes as well.
So I have two primary jobs. So I have two primary websites. So therapy is the neurodiversitycollective.com. That's where if you think you need an individual therapist, me or someone on my team will be your therapist. And we're very good at that. We can work with 40 out of the 50 states right now, which is pretty damn good.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, you have to be a licensed therapist in different states. You have to get your license in different states because there's different regulations.
Yeah. So we've done a good job about that. And then if you think this message that I've been talking about would be good for your organization, right? Whether you are a school or a corporation or the WWE,
they could use it, I'm sure.
There's no neurodivergence in WWE at all. It's, oh my goodness. Then you'd contact me at drmattzakreski.com. And especially if the book sounds interesting to you, like we're doing book studies. I just got to do a local radio spot. So it's something that,
very cool.
I try to keep that part of it separate from the practice because I'm the only person in our practice who does that. But there are lots of ways to reach me. And I certainly love to share the message of what I'm doing.
Of course. And again, thank you so much for your time today. All of those links, the websites, the book, your social media, those are all in the show notes for those of you who want to connect with Dr. Matt. Thank you for your time. You were very generous with some extra time. So I appreciate that as well. And we'll be doing this again soon, I hope.
I really hope so. I would look forward to it.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.